Alrighty, everybody. You must be tripping by now. If not, let's talk about that. How many of you have ever taken a hallucinogen? There's many different in the family. We have LSD, which was actually created or discovered, I should say, during a time where Swiss scientists was working on research for penicillin, seeing as how it derives itself from mold originally. That's where it came from. However, once again, like most other drugs, it sat around with no real clinical purpose. And then war. All right. Some chick named Geneva decided that there had to be rules in war. You know, you couldn't waterboard them. You couldn't torture them with electrodes. You couldn't X, Y, Z. But you could shoot them between the eyes. I mean, that's, war. So here it is. The government wound up using the hallucinogens in order to attempt to extract information from their captured enemy. Can you imagine some little Vietnamese boy? As we're trying to interrogate him. Yeah, I do believe they tried it, but it wasn't very effective. George Clooney played in this very dry movie called Men Who Stare at Goats, and that was what they were referencing as far as maybe using it to become an elite soldier. Because as one of our senses are dulled, then others are sharpened. So they were trying to make the soldier all you can be. All right, it's a little catchphrase for the Army, and that's where that came from. So here it was. There was an elite force of soldiers that were basically used as a little trial, a guinea pig to see how effective that was. At the same time, we had these individuals who were contesting our police actions over at Vietnam. We won't call it another world war because some guy named Nostradamus years ago prophesied that Third World War would be the war to end all wars and the red button and having to hit it and nuclear. Okay, so there was a potential danger, right? What we wound up looking at was my screen that people are trying to call in on, and it's distracting. I apologize. I don't have my Charlie. Anyway, so here it was. They had a bunch of young individuals who were protesting the police action in the streets. Now, little Chinaman Square, West Virginia, we've had mass people try to stand up in the streets and advocate for their needs, and it was met with resistance. And people were slaughtered. So they learned from that and decided not to do that again. Whether or not they're doing that with Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden the hot spots started coming up wherever people were protesting because of the whole recent tragedies that have taken place in the United States over the last couple worlds with Black Lives Matter, etc. But it is interesting to say where the hot spots were in correlation where they were, whether or not they were really releasing the numbers. Or anyway, that's too political. I did say we were going to go there a little bit, but for the most part, let's look at, so here it was, Vietnam. There were people standing in the streets and they were protesting police action, and they gave Timothy Leary, who was actually one of the recipients of LSD experiments while he was in the service, they gave him a lab at Berkeley University and the know-how to go ahead and make it. I mean, if you've ever done it, you know what I'm talking about. You can lead a horse to water, but put a little LSD in there or sugar, more than likely they'll drink, right? So what better way than to keep these individuals who were the cream of the crop? These individuals, their parents could afford to send them to college to avoid the draft. Can you imagine what our bankers and our lawyers and people in power would actually do if the police came in and wound up slaughtering them in the streets? So what better way to give them a drug, leave them in their dorm rooms, listening to their Janis Joplin and their Jimi Hendrix, Hey, two very well-known short-lived careers because of their use of mind and mood-altering chemicals and high-risk behaviors shortened their life. They didn't even see 30. But to listen to their music and the whole Doors and Pink Floyd and Grateful Dead and you name it. I mean, the music just really flourished in that era since Elvis started doing his little boogie woogie, right, on the dance floor, like that elderly lady that I referenced earlier. Anyway, so here it was. Times were changing. We were introduced to more and more chemicals. For the psychedelics, we also have magic mushrooms, right? Where do they grow? You got it. Cow patties. Yeah, let me grow something that's growing from that cow poop. Yay, let me eat that. Really? Yeah. Well, the trip wasn't too bad, but you couldn't overdose on it because your body would physically reject it and throw up once it had way too much, right? By then, Alice in Wonderland, hold on because your trip was coming. You were going down that rabbit hole. Another one is peyote. Peyote was used amongst our First Nations people, our American Indians, but we never really saw any stories about teenagers apprehended for throwing trash can through window of an appliance store in order to steal televisions. I mean, you just don't see those type of crimes happen as a result of the psychedelics. Trying to fly and jumping off a building, yeah, maybe we've heard something a time or two about that, but usually not on the crime end. However, peyote was used in our First Nations people culture as far as their rites of passage and what do I do now, spirit gods? Direct me, show me signs, right? I do believe that covers some. There's other chemicals that are close that are also used in other countries for their spiritual guidance as well, but they're not as common here in the United States. So, hope I took you on a little trip. Like I said, acid was one of those things. On one hand, I had all the answers to all the questions in the universe. The only problem was I didn't have the questions that go along with the answers.